Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got a custom-tailored journey for you today into a topic that touches, well, almost every aspect of your modern life,
Yeah.
even if you try your absolute hardest to avoid it.
Which, let's be honest, we all try to avoid.
Oh, constantly. I mean, think about the last time you sat down to read a legal contract or a piece of legislation or even just the updated terms of service agreement on a piece of software you use every day.
Right, exactly.
You stare at this absolute wall of text, the vocabulary feels entirely foreign, and before you know it, you're just scrolling rapidly to the bottom and hitting, I agree, because
Okay.
life is simply too short to decipher it all.
It is a remarkably universal experience. You're reading words that are technically English, but they're strung together with a density and a structure that feels almost, well, deliberately designed to keep you in the dark.
Yeah.
It creates this massive barrier, and frankly, it's intimidating, which is exactly why most people just surrender and sign the paper.
But today, we're going behind the curtain. We're going to figure out why those documents look the way they do, and more importantly, how that is actually beginning to change. We are pulling from a single, incredibly revealing source for this deep dive.
It's a fantastic document.
It really is. It's the Words and Phrases Guide.
Hmm.
Specifically, we're unpacking the A through D entries today. And this document was published by the Australian Capital Territory, or ACT Parliamentary Council's office, in February 2026.
Right. And on its face, it sounds dry, right? It's just a manual instructing government drafters on how to write using plain legal language.
Just a style guide.
Exactly. But when you dig into the rationale behind the rules they set, it becomes something else entirely. It essentially functions as a code book.
Oh, I love that description.
Because it doesn't just tell drafters what to do, it breaks down the secret language of lawyers. It exposes the historical baggage, the strange psychological reasons why legal documents are written so confusingly in the first place. But the underlying mission, the thing that's truly compelling here, is that it shows a government actively trying to mandate simple, plain English in order to democratize the law.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the guide makes its ambitions crystal clear right from the jump. It actually kicks off the introduction with a quote from Albert Einstein.
Setting the bar high.
Seriously high. The quote is, "Make everything as simple as possible, but no more simple than that." That is a fascinating standard to apply to a legal document, considering the law is, by its very nature, incredibly complex.
It's a brilliant framing device, though. It perfectly captures the core conflict the guide is trying to resolve. Writing law isn't like writing a novel. They reference a quote from Dennis Murphy, QC.
And just for context for you listening, a QC, or Queen's Counsel, is a title for a highly senior, deeply experienced legal expert.
Right, thank you. So Murphy outlines this incredible tightrope walk. On one hand, you have the fundamental democratic principle that the ordinary person of average intelligence should be able to read a law and reasonably understand what it means.
Seems fair.
It's the basic demand for clarity. But on the other hand, you can't simplify things so much that you lose the precision of the legal policy.
Right, because if you oversimplify,
They create loopholes.
exactly, you leave room for misinterpretation. So to help drafters actually survive that tightrope walk, the guide utilizes this remarkably strict, almost brutal, three-tier rating system for the vocabulary they are allowed to use.
Brutal is the right word.
Yeah. It categorizes specific words and phrases. First, you have the never use category. That is reserved for the worst, most archaic offenders, just banned entirely. Then you have avoid using, which implies you had better have a rock-solid, spectacular excuse if you're going to include it in a draft.
You'll be defending that choice to your boss.
Absolutely. And finally, consider alternatives, which honestly reads like a polite, professional way of telling a writer, we both know you can do better than this.
The rigidity of that system is necessary, though. If we connect this to the bigger picture and ask why this matters to you, the listener, we really have to look at how the guide cites Justice Felix Frankfurter.
Oh, yeah.
He pointed out that laws and contracts are not abstract propositions to be debated in a vacuum. They govern very specific, real-world situations. They dictate what you can and cannot do, what you owe, what you are owed.
It's your actual life.
Exactly. If you can't understand the rules of the game you're forced to play, you are operating at a massive disadvantage. Clear language in legal drafting isn't some aesthetic choice to make things look prettier on the page. It's a fundamental issue of fairness and access to justice.
Well said. Let's get into the actual crimes of legalese this guide is trying to stamp out, because some of these habits are just so deeply ingrained in the profession.
They really are.
One of the most common quirks you see in any legal document is the refusal to use just a single word. Lawyers love doublets and triplets.
Oh, yes.
They will write null and void, or give, devise, and bequeath, or fit and proper. I always just assumed this was a rhetorical flourish, lawyers trying to sound fancy. But the guide points out it's actually a wild historical hangover from the medieval period.
It really is. It's bizarre to think that when you sign a modern commercial lease today, you are interacting with a linguistic quirk from the Middle Ages.
It's time travel.
It is. Back then, the legal system was this messy, overlapping mixture of Latin, Norman, French, and English. So, to make sure everyone in the courtroom or on the contract actually understood the meaning, and to avoid any catastrophic ambiguity, lawyers started pairing words from different languages together.
Right.
So they'd take a common English word like will and pair it with the formal Latin word testament.
And centuries later, we're still saying last will and testament purely out of institutional momentum.
Exactly. It originated as a vital translation tool, but today, it's nothing more than clutter. And the guide is highly critical of this practice. It suggests that modern lawyers have developed a deep-seated natural distrust of their own ability to convey precise meaning with just a single word.
Yeah, they don't trust the singular word.
So they throw a barrage of synonyms onto the page and just hope that somewhere in that cluster, the true meaning will be captured and misinterpretation will be avoided.
The guide has a very evocative metaphor for that exact habit. It calls it using a verbal scattergun instead of a rifle shot.
That's such a great phrase.
It argues that stringing together a bunch of synonyms, phrases like authorize and empower, or final and conclusive, it doesn't actually add precision. It dilutes it. The guide actively advocates for the rifle shot approach. Take the time to pick the single most specific word that does the job.
Because if a decision is final, it is inherently conclusive. Stacking the words just wastes the reader's cognitive energy.
Completely. And beyond the doublets, the guide also targets what we might call foreign invaders. It puts a strict ban on Latin and Norman French terminology. The instruction is just, write the law in English.
Yes. Don't say ab initio, say from the start.
Instead of bona fide, use in good faith.
And replace ad hoc with as required.
The reasoning behind banning those foreign terms is quite aggressive too.
Yeah.
It isn't just about modernizing the vocabulary. The guide explicitly warns that sprinkling technical expressions in Latin or French acts as an immediate psychological barrier. It prevents non-lawyers from gaining even a baseline understanding of their rights.
Right.
But it goes a step further into the psychology of the drafter. It warns that foreign words are frequently misused to cloak an unjustified assumption with fig leaf respectability.
What's fascinating here is that the government is officially calling out intellectual sleight of hand within its own ranks. Fig leaf respectability is a striking phrase for a style manual.
Oh, it's a huge call out.
It is. It's acknowledging a known tactic. When a writer doesn't actually have a solid logical foundation for their argument, they will often dress it up in Latin.
Make it sound fancy.
Make it sound authoritative. And they hope the reader is too intimidated by the terminology to question the underlying logic. The guide is essentially stripping away that camouflage.
Speaking of camouflage, let's look at the time travel words, the archaisms.
Oh, the worst.
These are the words that instantly make a document feel formal, stiff, and ancient. We're talking about aforementioned, hereinafter, thereunto, wherewith. The guide's stance on this is zero tolerance.
Get rid of them all.
Every single one of those words has a clear, modern equivalent. You don't need hereinafter, you can just write from now on. Instead of herewith, you can simply say attached.
The persistence of archaisms highlights a really common fallacy in professional writing, not just in law, but in business generally. People often conflate formality with gravity.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
There's an assumption that if a document sounds old and difficult to parse, it must be legally binding and important. But the guide thoroughly dismantles that assumption. Those archaic words don't add an ounce of legal validity. They are nothing more than an irritating roadblock that slows down comprehension.
And it isn't just archaic words getting banned, it's overly polite words, too.
Oh, the euphemisms.
Yes. The guide takes a firm stance against euphemisms. For instance, it strictly prohibits drafters from using gentle terms like decease or demise when referring to someone passing away. It mandates the use of the most direct terminology available, die or death.
That's a crucial point regarding the function of legislation. The guide astutely notes that euphemisms are tools designed to disguise harsh realities or dress up disagreeable facts.
Right.
But when you are drafting a law, something that will dictate tax liabilities, inheritance, or criminal penalties, Disguising facts is the absolute last thing you want to do. You need unflinching clarity. If a specific legal mechanism is triggered when a person dies, the document must say dies. Vagueness, even polite vagueness, is the enemy of a functional, predictable legal system.
Which brings us to a section of the guide that reads almost like a psychological diagnosis of the legal profession. It identifies a massive contradiction in how lawyers tend to write, noting that the profession is plagued by two completely opposing vices. First, you have vice number one, the weasel words.
Ah, the weasel words. They are a classic drafting crutch. This occurs when a writer overqualifies their statements to the point of sounding timid, doubtful, or entirely evasive. We're talking about words like arguably, compelling, unduly, or substantially.
They act as escape hatches.
Precisely. They allow the writer to avoid making a definitive, absolute commitment to a position.
I have to share the guide's explanation for the origin of the term weasel word, because it paints such a vivid picture. It notes the term comes from the weasel's reputed habit of sucking the contents out of an egg while leaving the shell superficially intact.
That is amazing.
Right, so a weasel word is a modifier that completely destroys the force of a statement by quietly sucking all the actual meaning and commitment out of it, even though the sentence still looks complete.
It's an incredibly precise metaphor. You read a clause and you think you're getting a solid promise or a firm rule, an intact egg. But because the drafter slipped the word arguably into the sentence, you crack it open and realize there's no actual substance inside. It gives the illusion of a definitive statement without any of the legal liability.
But right alongside those timid weasel words, the guide identifies vice number two, the dogmatic words. Lawyers swing from one extreme to the other.
They absolutely do. While they love to build those escape hatches, they simultaneously overcompensate by heavily relying on dogmatic words like clearly, obviously, manifestly, and certainly.
Hammering the point.
Yes, and the guide is quick to point out that while these are intended to be intensifiers, they are almost universally misused in legal drafting.
The guide argues these words are almost always deployed to prop up a weak argument through sheer exaggeration.
Precisely. The logical breakdown here is airtight. If a fact or an argument is genuinely clear, you don't need to instruct the reader that it is clearly so. The evidence should speak for itself.
It's redundant.
It's worse than redundant. In practice, when a lawyer writes, "It is obvious that," it's generally a dead giveaway that the point they're making is highly debatable. They are using the dogmatic word to bully the reader into agreeing with an unsupported conclusion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The theoretical philosophy is fascinating, but the guide backs it up with a massive alphabetical list of specific rulings from A to D. And the nuance in some of these entries is just surprising. We all know these terms, but seeing how the government mandates their use or bans them entirely gives you rules you can immediately apply to your own professional writing. Let's dig into a few of the standouts, starting with a very common one, and/or.
Oh, and/or falls straight into the harshest penalty bucket. Never use.
Really? Never use.
Never. The guide dissects why this is such a problematic construction. It's essentially a lazy drafting shortcut. It attempts to present 3 different alternatives while only bothering to write out 2.
Huh. I never thought about it like that.
It shifts the burden of interpretation entirely onto the reader. It forces them to pause and do the mental gymnastics of mapping out every possible combination. The guide's mandated fix is refreshingly simple. Instead of writing A and/or B, you are required to write A or B or both.
A or B or both.
Yes. It takes a fraction of a second longer to type, but it entirely eliminates the cognitive load for the reader.
That makes so much sense. Okay, let's look at time frames. We all intuitively know there's a subtle difference between being told to do something as soon as possible versus as soon as practicable. But, in a casual email, we might use them interchangeably. How does the law define that boundary?
Well, in the legal realm, that boundary is highly defined and carries massive implications. The guide doesn't just offer an opinion here. It anchors the distinction in case law, specifically citing a case called Wills v. Whiteside.
Okay.
That case helped establish that as soon as possible is an incredibly strict, uncompromising requirement. If a contract says you must act as soon as possible, it means you drop everything else. You physically do it as fast as is humanly achievable.
Wow. So there's no room for excuses about being busy with other things.
Exactly. None. As soon as practicable, however, introduces built-in flexibility. It implies that the action must be taken quickly, but only within the bounds of what is reasonable given normal procedures, operational constraints, and the surrounding circumstances.
So if a business agreement requires you to notify a partner of a defect As soon as practicable, you are allowed to wait for normal business hours.
Or finish an ongoing critical task first, yes. It's a vital distinction when liability is on the line.
Another word that pops up constantly in contracts is deem. For example, the document is deemed to be received upon mailing. Now, I know this is used to create what's known as a legal fiction, basically treating a scenario as legally true even if it hasn't physically happened yet, like assuming a letter is delivered while it's still sitting in a mail truck.
Right, and legal fictions are necessary tools in drafting, but the guide takes a hard stance against the word deem itself to accomplish them. It views deem as just another piece of archaic baggage.
So what's the alternative?
The new mandate requires drafters to completely drop deem and replace it with the phrase taken to be.
Oh.
So the document is taken to be received. It achieves the exact same legal fiction, but it uses everyday language that a normal human being would actually say.
I also noticed a very specific entry regarding gender neutrality with the word chairperson. We've seen a massive evolution in how we address leadership titles, and the guide reflects that. It obviously issues a strict ban on gender-specific terms like chairman and chairwoman, which is standard practice now.
Right.
But it goes further and advises drafters to avoid the term chairperson as well.
The rationale there is an interesting reflection on how language evolves. Chairperson was widely adopted as an early attempt at achieving gender neutrality, but structurally, it's clunky, and it often feels forced in a sentence.
It does.
The guide's mandated solution is simply the most elegant option available. Just use the word chair. For instance, the chair adjourned the meeting. It achieves perfect gender neutrality while being efficient and unobtrusive.
I love that. I've got one more nuance from the list that I know you will appreciate. The guide breaks down the exact analytical difference between compare to and compare with.
Oh, this is a brilliant grammatical distinction, and one that is frequently lost in modern writing. The guide clarifies that historically, these phrases serve two very different analytical functions. Compare to is the phrase you use when your objective is to focus entirely on the similarities between two things. You are likening one object or concept to another to show how they align.
Like comparing a legal contract to a labyrinth.
Spot on. But compare with is the phrase you use when you are conducting a comprehensive analysis of both the similarities and the differences. You are placing two things side by side to evaluate the full spectrum of their relationship.
That's a great distinction.
It is. The guide acknowledges that the general public is increasingly blurring these terms.
Right.
But in the context of precise analytical writing, which legislation absolutely must be maintaining that distinction, is an incredibly powerful tool for clarity.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the origins of legal jargon back to the Middle Ages. We've explored the psychology of egg-sucking weasel words and dug into the highly specific rules imposed on government drafters. For you, the listener, who might just be trying to draft a more effective proposal at work, or prep for a negotiation, or just fully comprehend the rental agreement sitting on your kitchen table, what is the ultimate practical takeaway from all of this?
Synthesizing the core philosophy of this guide reveals a fundamental belief about communication. Knowledge is most valuable when it is easily understood and readily applied. This document from the ACT government transcends its purpose as an internal style manual for legal professionals.
It really does.
It operates as a masterclass in clear communication for anyone who writes. The overarching takeaway is the necessity to ruthlessly eliminate padding from your writing.
Like stripping out a phrase such as "at this moment in time" and replacing it with the single word "now."
Exactly. It's about recognizing and removing what the guide refers to as commercialese, those robotic, hollow phrases we all fall back on. Things like "as per our previous conversation" or "attached herewith."
We all do it.
We do. But the mandate is to write directly. Lean into the active voice. Always choose the single specific word over a cluster of vague synonyms. Whenever you draft a sentence, you are implicitly asking for someone else's time and cognitive energy. The most respectful thing you can do is be as clear, direct, and unambiguous as possible. As the Einstein quote demands, make it simple, but no simpler than that.
That is highly practical advice that applies far beyond the legal realm. Well, that brings us to the end of today's Deep Dives. Thank you for joining us as we navigated the surprisingly entertaining, occasionally baffling, and deeply practical world of plain legal drafting. Hopefully the next time you're confronted with a dense wall of terms and conditions, you'll feel a bit more equipped to spot the doublets, identify the archaisms, and see right through the weasel words.
Before we wrap up, this entire shift toward plain language raises an important question to consider.
Oh, definitely.
For centuries, the legal profession has maintained a near monopoly on a specific kind of societal power. And a significant reason for that monopoly was that lawyers were the only people equipped to translate the complex, archaic, and convoluted language of the law. They positioned themselves as the necessary gatekeepers between the citizen and their rights.
Right.
If governments successfully push this movement forward, if they eventually mandate that all legislation, all contracts, and all binding agreements must be written in perfectly plain, everyday English that any citizen can comprehend, does the traditional role of the lawyer fundamentally change? And if the language of power is finally translated into the language of the people, does that power ultimately shift back entirely to the everyday citizen? Something to ponder.